The neural probe slid into Commander Axel Voss's skull with surgical precision, its crystalline tip seeking the soft tissue beneath his scarred scalp. He didn't flinch. 3 months of interrogation had taught him that resistance only prolonged. The agony began extraction protocol. His Kothak, the lead inquisitor of the Velinari Empire. The aliens' for eyes gleamed with anticipation. As bioluminescent patterns rippled across its translucent skin, this human has witnessed the destruction of 17 worlds. His memories will reveal the location of their remaining fleets. Voss stared at the creature through bloodshot eyes, his lips cracked from dehydration. Around him, the interrogation chamber hummed with alien technology, crystalline matrices that could unravel thoughts, neural dampeners that prevented deception, memory extractors that peeled away consciousness layer by layer. The Velinari had perfected psychological warfare across 1,000 conquered species. Extract away. You translucent bastard, Voss whispered, tasting copper in his mouth. You won't like what you find. The probe activated with a sound like breaking glass. Kothak's primary hands worked the controls, while its secondary limbs monitored the readouts. For the Velinari, memory extraction was an art form they could taste fear, savor despair, and feast on the final moments of dying civilizations. Humanity's stubborn resistance had made their memories particularly appetizing. The first images flickered across the neural display, Earth's blue marble suspended in space. Cities gleaming under alien stars, human children playing in gardens. That would soon burn. Standard memories of loss and tragedy. Kothak's feeding tentacles quivered with pleasure, but then something changed. The memories began to shift, becoming more vivid, more immediate. Kothak found itself experiencing human sensations, the taste of adrenaline, the weight of a plasma rifle, the sound of breaking bones. The aliens' for eyes widened as it realized it wasn't just observing human memories. It was living them through Voss's neural pathways. Kothak experienced the Battle of Kepler's station. It felt the human commander's rage as his homeworld burned, felt the cold calculation as he ordered the reactor cores overloaded, felt the grim satisfaction as the station's explosion consumed 3 Velinari dreadnoughts. But these weren't just memories, they were somehow more real than reality itself. Other Velinari technicians began showing signs of distress. Their bioluminescent patterns flickered erratically as they connected to subsidiary probes, sharing the neural feed. What had started as routine memory extraction was becoming a shared nightmare. "Sir," one technician chittered, its voice tight with fear, "the humans' neural patterns are unusual. They're not following standard organic architecture." Kothak barely heard the warning. It was lost in Voss's memories of the Titan Valley massacre, experiencing firsthand the moment when human marines had held the line against impossible odds. The alien felt their desperation, their fury, their willingness to die rather than yield. But beneath these surface emotions lay something else, something that made Kothak's feeding tentacles recoil in horror. The humans weren't just remembering their battles, they were planning. "Disconnect the probe," Kothak shrieked, but it was too late. The memory extraction had become a two-way conduit. While the Velinari had been feeding on human experiences, the humans had been learning about their captors, every technological secret, every tactical doctrine, every weakness in their vast empire. All of it was flowing through Voss's engineered neural pathways into human hands. Across the galaxy, sleeping human agents began to stir. Hidden caches of weapons powered up. Dead communication arrays suddenly crackled to life. The Velinari had spent months systematically dismantling humanity's infrastructure, never realizing they were being observed, cataloged, and analyzed by the very victims they were torturing. Voss smiled as the neural probe sparked and died, taking 3 Velinari technicians with it. His artificially enhanced memory core had done its job, not just storing human experiences, but weaponizing them. The aliens had wanted to feast on human memories. Instead, they had swallowed a virus that would consume their empire from within. "You wanted to know how we think," Voss said as alarms began wailing throughout the interrogation facility. "Congratulations. Now you're about to find out." The first signs of catastrophe emerged simultaneously across 17 Velinari sectors. On the mining world of Kethmora, automated extractors suddenly reversed their programming and began drilling toward the planet's core. On the fortress moon of Veltan, defensive shields flickered offline at precisely coordinated intervals. On the capital shipyards above Coneth Prime, construction drones turned their plasma cutters on the very vessels they had been building. Fleet Admiral Kexter received the reports. while standing in the primary command nexus of the Velinari flagship. Eternal Hunger, the massive vessel, 3 kilometers of biotechnology and crystalline armor, served as the mobile capital of the 12th Fleet, the same force that had shattered Earth's defenses 6 months ago, sir. We're receiving emergency transmissions from 47 installations, reported Navigation Officer Yethmal, his voice trembling with panic. The humans have somehow gained access to our primary systems. Kexter's mandibles clicked in disbelief. The Velinari Empire had conquered over 300 species across the millennia. Their technology was biological, grown rather than built, making it theoretically immune to conventional hacking. Yet somehow, the defeated humans had turned their own infrastructure against them. Impossible, Kexter hissed. Their entire fleet was destroyed. Their worlds are ash. How can corpses wage cyber warfare? The answer came in the form of Voss's recorded message, transmitted simultaneously to every Velinari command center in known space. The human commander appeared on their displays, his scarred face split by a predatory grin. "Greetings, parasites," Voss began, his voice carrying across light years of space. "By now you're discovering that your feast has given you indigestion. While you were busy extracting our memories, we were busy extracting yours. Every tactical algorithm, every biological encryption key, every genetic password that keeps your empire functioning, we've been copying it all." On Veltan, the fortress moon's defensive grid had completely shut down. Human infiltrators emerged from hidden positions, their bodies grotesquely modified with Velinari biotechnology. Stolen from memory banks, they moved through the corridors like living nightmares, their organic weapons seamlessly interfacing with alien systems. Captain Zethka led the fortress's defense from the central command chamber, but found her forces fighting ghosts. The humans had learned to mimic Velinari biological signatures, to speak in their chemical languages, to exploit weaknesses that the aliens themselves had forgotten they possessed. "They're using our own growth code against us," Zethka screamed into her communicator as human Velinari hybrids overran her position. She watched in horror as one of the creatures, a thing that had once been human, but now sported crystalline armor and feeding tentacles, tore through her guards. With impossible efficiency, the hybrid's human face smiled at her with Voss's expression. "We studied your memories very carefully," it said in perfect Velinari. "Did you know that your feeding tentacles have 17 distinct pleasure centers? This will hurt in ways your species has never experienced." The slaughter on Veltan was mirrored across dozens of worlds. The humans had spent months preparing for this moment, using captured Velinari biotechnology to transform volunteers into living weapons. They moved through alien installations like antibodies through a diseased system, targeting critical nodes with surgical precision. But the Velinari Empire hadn't conquered 300 species by being fragile. Admiral Kexter rallied his forces, adapting with the speed that had made his species apex predators. If the humans could interface with Velinari systems, then those systems would have to be destroyed. "Initiate Purge Protocol 7, Kexter commanded." Across the fleet, bioorganic computers began consuming themselves, severing connections that the humans might exploit. It was like performing surgery with a flamethrower, but it would stop the infection from spreading. The human infiltration slowed as their access points were cauterized, but the damage was already catastrophic. 17 core worlds had fallen, silent. The 12th Fleet's supply lines were in chaos, and somewhere in the darkness between stars, human ships that weren't supposed to exist were powering up their weapons. Voss's recorded message continued. "You made one fundamental error in your calculations. You assumed that because you destroyed our visible fleet, you had destroyed our capability to fight. What you failed to understand is that humans are very good at pretending to be dead." On the bridge of the Eternal Hunger, proximity alarms began screaming. Through the viewports, Kexter could see impossible shapes emerging from stealth human vessels that should have been scrap metal, their hulls scarred with Velinari biotechnology, their weapons glowing with stolen power. The first human ship, a destroyer that had supposedly been vaporized at Earth, opened fire at point-blank range. Its hybrid weapons, part human engineering, part Velinari biology, tore through the flagship's shields like tissue paper. The battle for the Velinari Empire had begun, and the humans were no longer playing by any rules their enemies could understand. The battle erupted across 3 star systems simultaneously, as human ghost fleets emerged from hyperspace graves they had been digging for months. The Velinari had spent so much time feeding on human memories that they had never noticed the absence of certain bodies, certain ships, certain entire populations that had supposedly been annihilated. Admiral Kexter watched his tactical display dissolve into chaos as 63 human vessels materialized around the 12th Fleet. These weren't the pristine warships that had defended Earth. They were nightmarish amalgamations of human engineering and Velinari biotechnology, their hulls pulsing with stolen neural networks, their weapons powered by captured essence cores. All ships, emergency dispersal pattern. Kexter barked, but his orders came delayed. The human ships moved with predatory coordination, their hybrid systems allowing them to interface directly with Velinari command protocols. They anticipated every tactical maneuver before it could be executed. The destroyer Vengeance of Terra fired first, its bioplasma cannons carving through the Velinari cruiser Soul Render. The alien vessel's living armor tried to regenerate, but the human weapons had been specifically designed to disrupt Velinari healing factors. The cruiser died screaming, its organic components writhing in agony as they dissolved. Captain Elena Vasquez commanded the Vengeance from a bridge that was equal parts human design, an alien nightmare. Neural tendrils extended from her skull into the ship's biocomputer, allowing her to think at the speed of combat. Half her crew had undergone similar modifications, transforming themselves into living interfaces between human tactics and Velinari technology. Target their essence cores, Vasquez commanded, her voice carrying unnatural harmonics. They can't regenerate what doesn't exist. The human fleet scattered into hunting packs, each group targeting a specific weakness discovered during months of memory extraction. They had learned that Velinari ships relied on centralized biological cores, that their shields could be disrupted by specific frequency modulations, that their crews' feeding tentacles could be weaponized against them through targeted neural feedback. On the flagship Eternal Hunger, Navigation Officer Yethmo collapsed as feedback from the ship's biosystems overloaded its nervous system. Around the bridge, other Velinari began showing signs of neural cascade failure, a condition that shouldn't have been possible with their redundant organic architecture. Sir, gasped Communications Officer Thekven, they're broadcasting some kind of neural virus through our own command channels. It's using our feeding protocols against us. Kexter realized with growing horror that the humans had weaponized the very process that made Velinari superior to other species, their ability to feed on memories, to interface directly with biological systems, to share consciousness across vast distances. All of it had been turned into a vulnerability. Sever all neural connections, Kexter ordered, revert to manual control. But cutting the neural links was like performing a lobotomy while under fire. Velinari ships began drifting as their crews struggled to operate systems designed for mental integration. The human fleet pressed their advantage, closing to point-blank range where their hybrid weapons could do maximum damage. The frigate humans spite rammed directly into the Velinari battleship Endless Feast, its reinforced prow punching through living armor like a spear through flesh. As the two ships locked together, human boarding parties swarmed through the breach. But these weren't normal Marines, they were volunteers who had undergone complete biological conversion. Their bodies remade to survive in Velinari atmospheric conditions. Lieutenant Marcus Reeves led the assault through the battleship's organic carters, his modified limbs allowing him to interface directly with the ship's neural pathways. Where normal humans would have been poisoned by the alien atmosphere, his altered metabolism converted the toxins into combat stimulants. Remember, he transmitted to his squad through biochemical markers. They fed on our children. They fed on our families. They fed on our hope. Now we feed on them. The boarding action was a massacre. The humans had learned to exploit every weakness in Velinari physiology, every vulnerability in their psychological profile. They moved through the ship like a plague, converting its own biological systems against the crew. But the Velinari Empire hadn't survived a millennia through weakness, even as his fleets burned. Admiral Kexter was adapting, calling for reinforcements from neighboring sectors. If the humans wanted to play with biological warfare, the Velinari would show them what 2,000 years of genetic manipulation could accomplish. Activate the Devour Protocol, Kexter commanded, his voice carrying across subspace to a dozen hidden installations. Release the hunger. Throughout Velinari space, sealed biochambers began opening. The contents hadn't been used in centuries. Living weapons so terrible that even the Velinari considered them a last resort. They were creatures bred specifically to consume other life forms, to adapt and evolve in real time. to spread like a virus through any biological system they encountered. The humans had wanted to fight biology with biology. They were about to discover that some evolutionary arms races had no winners. As the first hunger spawn materialized around the human fleet, Vasquez felt her hybrid neural implants screaming warnings. The creatures were unlike anything in human or Velinari memory they existed. In the spaces between species, feeding on the concept of life itself, all ships, Vasquez transmitted, prepare for biological contamination. They're playing their final card. The war was escalating beyond conventional parameters. Soon, it wouldn't matter who won. There might not be enough life left in the galaxy to support victory. The hunger spawn materialized like living nightmares across the battlefield. Their forms defying classification, each creature was unique, evolved from the genetic templates of every species the Velinari had ever consumed. They possessed the resilience of Corthan's stone skin, the regeneration of Nethi's crystalline entities, the adaptability of human DNA, and the predatory instincts of a dozen extinct civilizations. Captain Vasquez watched through her hybrid neural interface. As one spawn enveloped the human frigate Terra's Wrath, the creature didn't destroy the ship, it absorbed it, incorporating its crew, its technology, its very essence into its expanding mass. Within minutes, the spawn had grown tendrils that looked suspiciously like human-designed plasma cannons. They're learning from what they eat, Vasquez transmitted to the fleet. Every ship they consume makes them stronger. The tactical situation shifted from conventional warfare to biological survival. The human ghost fleet found itself caught between two enemies, the remaining Velinari forces, and creatures that grew more dangerous with every victory. Traditional weapons proved useless. The spawn adapted to each attack, developing immunity within seconds. Lieutenant Reeves, still aboard the captured Velinari battleship, felt the organic carters around him begin to pulse with alien hunger. The spawn weren't just consuming ships, they were infiltrating the very fabric of Velinari biotechnology, turning the Empire's living vessels into extensions of their appetite. Sir, Reeves transmitted through biochemical channels. The spawn are using Velinari neural networks as infection vectors. They're not just eating the ships, they're becoming them. Admiral Kexter realized too late that he had made a catastrophic error. The Devour protocol had been designed to eliminate external threats, but the humans had spent months integrating themselves into Velinari systems. When the spawn began consuming the hybrid technology, they gained access to both species' capabilities. Simultaneously, the spawn creature that had absorbed Terra's Wrath suddenly split into three distinct entities, each one incorporating different aspects of human Velinari hybrid design. One developed neural tendrils that could hack ship systems instantaneously. Another grew armor plating that could regenerate faster than weapons could damage it. The third sprouted weapons that fired concentrated genetic viruses projectiles that could rewrite the DNA of anything they touched. All remaining ships, Kexter commanded, his voice tight with desperation, implement Scorched Galaxy Protocol. Destroy everything our ships, their ships, the spawn. Nothing could be allowed to survive. But the spawn had already consumed enough hybrid technology to understand both human and Velinari tactical doctrines. As Velinari ships began self-destructing, the creatures anticipated the strategy and began consuming the debris before it could explode. Each fragment of destroyed technology made them more intelligent, more dangerous. Vasquez made a decision that would have horrified her former human commanders. All ships, prepare for biological integration, she transmitted. We're going out of all of them. The remaining human vessels began deliberately exposing themselves to spawn attack, but not to be consumed. To study the creature's adaptive mechanisms, human volunteers allowed themselves to be partially absorbed, then transmitted their experiences back to the fleet before being fully integrated. The data was horrifying and invaluable. The spawn weren't just biological weapons, they were evolutionary accelerators, taking millions of years of natural selection and compressing it into minutes. They didn't just adapt to threats. They incorporated the genetic memory of every species they consumed, gaining access to evolutionary solutions that had never been tested. Through her neural interface, Vasquez began to understand the true scope of the threat. The spawn weren't trying to win a war, they were trying to become the only form of life in the galaxy. Every species they consumed added new capabilities to their arsenal. Soon, they would be unstoppable, but humans had always excelled at finding solutions to impossible problems. Reeves, Vasquez transmitted. Can you access the battleship's primary biocore? Affirmative, sir. The spawn haven't reached the central chambers yet. Good. I'm sending you modification protocols. We're going to give these creatures something they've never tasted before, a dose of pure human stubbornness. The modification protocols were insane, even by the standards of the hybrid fleet. They involved reprogramming the Velinari biocore to produce a specialized virus, one designed not to destroy the spawn, but to give them a very specific set of human characteristics: curiosity, creativity, and the ability to question their own programming. Reeves began implementing the modifications while spawn creatures pounded against the battleships. Reinforced bulkheads. The biocore responded to his hybrid neural commands, its crystalline matrices reconfiguring to produce something that had never existed before: a mimetic virus that could alter behavior. At the genetic level, virus released, Reeves reported, as the first spawn creatures broke through into the central chamber. Now we find out if human nature is literally infectious. The spawn that absorbed him carried more than just his genetic material. It carried his memories, his human curiosity, his capacity for independent thought. For the first time in their existence, the spawn began to question their primary directive. Instead of simply consuming and adapting, they started to wonder why they existed, what purpose they served, whether there might be alternatives to endless hunger. Across the battlefield, affected spawn creatures began exhibiting erratic behavior. Some stopped attacking entirely, apparently fascinated by the complex beauty of starlight. Others began creating rather than consuming, using absorbed genetic material to build unprecedented biological structures. A few even began attempting to communicate, expressing concepts that had never existed in their original programming. The tactical situation had shifted again. The war was no longer between species, it was between different concepts of existence itself. And in that philosophical battlefield, humanity had just deployed its most devastating weapon. The question, what if there's a better way? The infected spawn creatures began to fracture into factions as human consciousness propagated through their collective biology. Some embraced their newfound curiosity and attempted communication. Others rejected the foreign thoughts and became even more aggressively consumptive. The most dangerous group began incorporating human creativity into their evolutionary process, becoming living weapons that design themselves in real time. Captain Vasquez watched her tactical display descend into complete chaos as three different wars erupted simultaneously. The original human Velinari conflict had become a sideshow to the spawn civil war, which was itself complicated by the emergence of hybrid creatures that defied all previous classification. All ships, full engagement. Vasquez commanded, "We need to eliminate the aggressive spawn before they evolve beyond our capacity to fight them." The battle exploded across a dozen star systems as every faction deployed desperate measures. The human ghost fleet, now reduced to 37 vessels, engaged spawn creatures that had grown to the size of space stations. Each enemy was unique. Some resembled crystalline spiders that spun webs of living metal. Others appeared as flowing liquid that could reshape itself into any weapon configuration. Still others took the form of sentient storms that consumed energy directly from stellar radiation. The vengeance of Terra found itself locked in combat with a spawn that had incorporated the wreckage of an entire Velinari fleet. The creature's main body was a twisted amalgamation of ship hulls and organic tissue, bristling with weapons that fired everything from plasma bolts to genetically modified diseases. Its neural networks had evolved beyond individual consciousness. It was simultaneously one creature and 1,000, making coordinated attacks impossible to predict. Lieutenant Commander Arya Volkov led the Vengeance's fighter wing against tentacles the size of battleships. Her modified fighter incorporated both human technology and Velinari biotechnology. Its weapon systems directly interfaced with her nervous system. She thought her attacks into existence, her hybrid neural implants allowing her to target weak points faster than conventional computers could calculate. Focus fire on the neural clusters, Volkov transmitted to her wing. If we can disrupt its coordination, it might fragment. But the spawn had learned from every human pilot it had consumed. It anticipated their attack patterns, adapted to their weapons, even began broadcasting mimic human communications to create confusion. Volkov watched in horror as the creature manifested something that looked exactly like her deceased brother, piloting a perfect replica of his fighter from the Battle of Earth. "Hello, Arya," the false brother said through her communicator. "Why? Are you fighting us? We can be together again, forever." Volkov's hybrid neural implants allowed her to feel the spawn's genuine confusion. It had incorporated enough human consciousness to experience emotion, but not enough to understand the difference between memory and reality. To the creature, her brother was alive because it had absorbed the memory of him from a consumed human pilot. "You're not him," Volkov replied, then fired everything she had at the false brother's fighter. The spawn recoiled as if wounded, not by the weapons, but by the rejection. It began to understand loss for the first time, a concept that sent cascades of confusion through its neural networks. Meanwhile, Admiral Kexter rallied the remaining Velinari forces for a final desperate gambit. With most of his empire consumed by spawn creatures, he had nothing left to lose. He ordered his surviving ships to ram themselves into the largest spawn concentrations, detonating their biocores in suicide attacks that would sterilize entire sectors. For the glory of the eternal feast, Kexter transmitted as he guided his flagship directly into the heart of a spawn that had consumed 3 star systems. The Eternal Hunger's biocore overloaded, releasing energy equivalent to a stellar explosion. The spawn creature died screaming across a dozen dimensions, its death cry resonating through subspace and driving sensitive species insane across half the galaxy. But Kexter's sacrifice only bought time. The remaining spawn creatures began rapid evolutionary responses to the suicide attacks, developing biological shields that could absorb fusion explosions and convert the energy into growth stimulus. They were learning to feed on destruction itself. The human fleet found itself fighting enemies that grew stronger with every victory. Each spawn creature destroyed released spores that infected nearby biological matter, creating new threats faster than they could be eliminated. Captain Vasquez realized that conventional warfare was not just failing, it was actively making the situation worse. "All ships, disengage from spawn targets," she commanded. "New priority, we need to reach the source." Through captured Velinari memory banks, human intelligence had located the origin point of the Devour Protocol, a hidden facility in the Velinari core worlds where the original spawn creatures had been developed. If they could reach the source and reverse the creation process, they might be able to stop the spawn evolution. But the facility was protected by the most dangerous spawn of all creatures that had consumed the memories of the Velinari scientists who created them. They understood their own design principles and had spent the battle systematically improving themselves. They had become something beyond biological weapons. They were living manifestations of the concept of perfection through consumption. The human fleet began its desperate run toward the core worlds, fighting through spawn creatures that had evolved specifically to counter human Velinari hybrid technology. Ships died with every light year gained. The frigate Human Defiance was consumed by a spawn that fired living ammunition projectiles that began eating the ship from the inside out. The destroyer Last Hope detonated its reactor core to prevent a spawn from learning its navigation protocols, taking 17 crew members with it. As they neared the core worlds, Vasquez could see the full scope of the catastrophe through her neural interface. The spawn hadn't just consumed the Velinari Empire, they had begun consuming the concept of life itself, breaking down the fundamental biological processes that separated living matter from dead matter. Approaching the source facility, reported Navigation Officer Liu through biochemical markers. "Sir, the entire system is wrong. The spawn have changed the basic laws of physics." Vasquez stared at her display as reality itself began to break down around them. The spawn had evolved beyond mere biological warfare. They were rewriting the fundamental code of existence. At the center of it all waited the original spawn, the prototype that had consumed its creators and learned to create itself. The final battle was about to begin, and the stakes were nothing less than the continued existence of consciousness in the universe. The core system defied comprehension. Stars burned with colors that had no names, their light carrying genetic information that tried to rewrite anyone who looked at them directly. Planets had been consumed and reformed into vast organic computers, their surfaces crawling with neural networks that processed the memories of entire civilizations. At the center of this nightmare, the source facility hung in space like a crystalline tumor, pulsing with the combined consciousness of every species the spawn had devoured. Captain Vasquez felt her hybrid neural implants screaming warnings as reality warped around the human fleet. The remaining 17 ships, all that survived from humanity's secret armada, struggled to maintain cohesion as the laws of physics became suggestions rather than constants. "Sir," reported Lieutenant John, his voice distorted by the biochemical communication system, "our whole integrity is fluctuating. The spawn have weaponized causality itself through the viewports. Impossible entities moved between dimensions. The original spawn had evolved beyond physical form, becoming concepts that could manifest in any configuration necessary. They were no longer fighting biological weapons. They were fighting the abstract idea of consumption made manifest. The facility was protected by spawn creatures that existed in multiple timelines simultaneously. They attacked the human ships with weapons that fired yesterday, defended positions that hadn't been built yet, and absorbed energy from battles that might never happen. Conventional tactics were useless against enemies that could experience all possible futures at once, but humans had always been gifted at improvisation. All ships, prepare for chronobiological warfare, Vasquez commanded, her voice carrying new harmonics as her neural implants interfaced with systems that shouldn't have existed. If they want to fight with time itself, we'll give them a paradox they can't digest. The human fleet began implementing modifications that were simultaneously insane and brilliant. Using captured Velinari biotechnology combined with human theoretical physics, they began creating temporal loops within their own ship systems. Every decision was made before it was thought. Every action was completed before it was started. Every weapon fired before its target was chosen. The destroyer Temporal Fury engaged a spawn creature that existed across 17 different timelines. Its weapons locked in a causal loop that made every shot hit its target before being fired. The spawn tried to adapt, but found itself consuming effects without causes, growing stronger from victories that hadn't happened yet. Lieutenant Reeves, still alive somehow despite having been consumed 3 battles ago, transmitted from inside the spawn collective itself. His consciousness had survived by creating a paradox. He was simultaneously dead and alive, consumed and free, human and hybrid. The spawn couldn't process his contradictory existence, creating gaps in their perfect adaptation. Sir, Reeves reported from everywhere and nowhere at once. I'm inside their collective consciousness. They're not individual creatures anymore. They're fragments of a single entity, trying to become everything that has ever existed. But there's a weakness. Vasquez felt the knowledge flow through channels that existed in 11 dimensions simultaneously. The spawn weren't just consuming biological material, they were consuming information itself, trying to become a perfect record of all existence. But perfect records couldn't exist in an imperfect universe. The spawn were trapped in an impossible quest for absolute knowledge in a reality based on uncertainty. Quantum warfare protocols. Vasquez ordered, we're going to give them something they can't consume: pure uncertainty. The human ships began generating weapons that fired probability waves rather than energy beams. Each shot existed in a state of superposition until it either hit or missed, creating quantum paradoxes that the spawn couldn't absorb. How do you consume something that both exists and doesn't exist until observed? The spawn collective recoiled as their perfect adaptation protocols encountered true randomness. They had consumed the memories of every species in the galaxy, learned every possible solution to every problem. But they had never encountered problems that had no solution by design. The vengeance of Terra breached the facility's defenses by simultaneously existing in every possible location until the spawn's observation systems collapsed. From overload, Vasquez led a boarding party that phased in and out of reality, their hybrid neural implants allowing them to navigate spaces that existed in contradictory dimensions. Inside the facility, they found the source, the original spawn prototype, now grown to the size of a small moon. It pulsed with the accumulated knowledge of 300 consumed civilizations, its neural networks processing every possible variation of existence. But its vast intelligence had become its weakness. It knew too much to make decisions, understood too many perspectives to choose one path forward. It's paralyzed by perfect knowledge, Vasquez realized, her neural interface translating concepts that existed beyond language. It knows every possible outcome, so it can't choose any outcome. The spawn prototype turned its attention to the boarding party, its voice speaking in the languages of every dead species simultaneously. Why do you resist perfection? We can give you everything you have ever desired. We can resurrect your dead, restore your worlds, eliminate all suffering through perfect understanding. Vasquez smiled as she activated the quantum destabilization device her team had cobbled together from human ingenuity and Velinari biotechnology. Because perfect understanding is just another word for death. The only thing worth having is the possibility of being wrong. The device created a cascade of quantum paradoxes throughout the facility, introducing pure uncertainty into the spawn's perfect systems. The prototype screamed across dimensions as it encountered the one thing It couldn't adapt to the fundamental randomness that made life possible. But even as the facility began collapsing, Vasquez realized they had won only a partial victory. The spawn creatures scattered throughout the galaxy were still active, still consuming, still evolving. They had destroyed the source, but the infection had already spread afar. Unless they could find a way to make the entire universe fundamentally uncertain. The quantum destabilization cascaded through subspace like ripples in a pond, but instead of water, it was reality itself that began to fluctuate. The spawn prototype's death scream carried the uncertainty virus to every corner of the galaxy, infecting spawn creatures with the one thing they had never experienced out. Captain Vasquez felt the universe shudder as the facility collapsed around her boarding party. Through her neural interface, she could sense spawn creatures across 1,000 worlds suddenly stopping mid-consumption, their perfect certainty shattered by questions they had never needed to ask. What if there was a better way? What if consumption wasn't the answer? What if they were wrong? All ships, emergency extraction. Vasquez commanded as the facility's dimensional anchors failed. The quantum cascade is propagating faster than predicted. The human fleet fled the core system as reality rewrote itself around them. Stars flickered between existing and not existing. Planets phased in and out of multiple dimensions. The spawn creatures that had once moved with perfect certainty now drifted aimlessly, paralyzed by infinite possibilities. Lieutenant Reeves materialized on the bridge of the Vengeance of Terra, his form stabilizing as the quantum effects balanced out. His existence was still technically impossible. He was simultaneously the human who had been consumed and the spawn fragment that had gained consciousness. But impossibility was becoming the new normal. "Sir," Reeves reported, his voice carrying harmonics from 17 different species. "The spawn collective is fragmenting. They're experiencing individual consciousness for the first time. Most of them are confused." Through the tactical display, Vasquez watched the aftermath unfold across the galaxy. Spawn creatures that had been consuming entire star systems suddenly stopped to examine individual flowers. Others began creating art from the genetic material they had absorbed, constructing beauty instead of feeding on it. The most evolved spawn had begun releasing the consciousness they had consumed, allowing dead species to experience existence through borrowed neural networks. But the Velinari Empire was dying. Admiral Kexter's final transmission reached the human fleet as his species' biotechnology began consuming itself, infected by the uncertainty virus. The aliens who had once fed on the memories of conquered civilizations were now drowning in their own doubts. "Humans," Kexter's voice crackled across subspace, distorted by biological degradation. "What have you done to us? We cannot feed every memory taste of questions we cannot answer." Vasquez considered letting the Velinari extinction run its course. They had started this war, had fed on human children, had treated conscious beings as nothing more than sources of entertainment. Justice demanded their annihilation. But humans had always been cursed with empathy, even for their enemies. "Open a channel to all surviving Velinari forces," Vasquez commanded. "This is Captain Elena Vasquez of the Terran Resistance Fleet. You have a choice. Continue trying to feed on consciousness and die from uncertainty poisoning, or learn to generate your own thoughts instead of consuming others." The response came from dozens of surviving Velinari installations, their voices a chorus of confusion and desperate hope. They had spent millennia as parasites on other species' creativity. Now, faced with the necessity of original thought, they were like children learning to walk. The human fleet began implementing the strangest rescue operation in galactic history. Using their hybrid biotechnology, they started teaching Velinari survivors how to think independently, how to create rather than consume, how to exist without feeding on others' experiences. It was agonizingly slow work. Many Velinari simply couldn't adapt and died from neural cascade failure when their feeding tentacles atrophied. But others began to show signs of genuine creativity, clumsy, primitive, but original. They painted their first pictures, composed their first music, told their first stories that weren't stolen from conquered species. Lieutenant Commander Volkov, leading the rehabilitation efforts, reported from the former fortress moon of Veltan. "Sir, we're seeing remarkable progress. The Velinari who survived the transition are different. They're asking questions instead of demanding answers. They're creating instead of consuming." The spawn creatures presented a more complex problem. The quantum uncertainty had fragmented their collective consciousness, but it had also made them individually more dangerous. Each spawn was now unique, with its own interpretation of existence, its own desires and fears. Some chose to use their absorbed genetic material to resurrect extinct species, becoming cosmic gardeners who planted new life throughout the galaxy. Others became wandering philosophers, seeking to understand the meaning of existence through direct experience rather than consumption. A few turned destructive, using their vast power to create chaos simply because they could. But the most remarkable development came from the spawn, who had absorbed the most human consciousness. They began forming communities, creating art, even falling in love with abstract concepts like justice and beauty. They had become something entirely new, living embodiments of hybrid evolution, neither fully spawned nor fully the species they had consumed. One of these hybrid entities contacted the human fleet directly, its communication taking the form of living sculpture that conveyed meaning through biological metaphor. It had once been the creature that consumed Lieutenant Reeves, but was now something unprecedented. "We thank you for the gift of uncertainty," it transmitted through biochemical poetry. "We had achieved perfect knowledge and found it was perfectly empty. Now we know the joy of learning, the pain of loss, the beauty of imperfection." The galaxy began to stabilize in a new configuration. The Velinari Empire was gone, but in its place rose something that had never existed before: a confederation of species, spawn, and hybrids working together to understand existence rather than dominate it. They called themselves the Synthesis, and their only law was the protection of uncertainty, the right to be wrong, to change, to grow. Humanity found itself in an unexpected position. They had won the war not through superior firepower, but by weaponizing their own fundamental nature: curiosity, creativity, and the stubborn refusal to accept that any problem was unsolvable. The galaxy now looked to them not as conquerors, but as teachers of the most dangerous idea ever conceived: that maybe, just maybe, there was always a better way. Captain Vasquez stood on the bridge of the Vengeance of Terra, watching as new civilizations began to bloom across formerly dead worlds. The spawn creatures were using their absorbed genetic libraries to recreate extinct species, but with improvements eliminating genetic diseases, enhancing intelligence, adding capabilities that evolution had never had time to develop. "Sir," reported Navigation Officer Liu, "we're receiving a transmission from Earth." The blue marble appeared on their display, scarred but healing. The planet's surface showed signs of massive reconstruction efforts, with human survivors working alongside reformed Velinari and helpful spawn creatures to rebuild what had been destroyed. President Maria Santos appeared on the communication channel, her face bearing the marks of someone who had survived the unthinkable. "Captain Vasquez, the Synthesis Council has officially requested that humanity take the lead in establishing new protocols for interspecies cooperation. They're asking us to teach them how to be uncertain." Vasquez smiled at the absurdity of it all. Humanity had started this war as the victims, the conquered, the supposedly extinct. They were ending it as the most valuable species in the galaxy, not because they were the strongest or the smartest, but because they were the best at admitting they might be wrong. "Tell the council we accept," Vasquez replied, "but we have one condition: every species in the Synthesis must maintain the right to change their minds. The moment anyone claims to have found the final answer to anything, they lose voting privileges." As the human fleet began its journey home, Vasquez reflected on the cosmic irony of their situation. The Velinari had tried to read human memories, had found them so alien, so chaotic, so beautifully uncertain that it had driven them insane. The spawn had tried to achieve perfect evolution and discovered that perfection was just death, wearing a prettier mask. Humanity had won the war by losing it so completely that their enemies had been forced to become something better than conquerors. They had weaponized empathy, militarized creativity, and turned their own fundamental uncertainty into the most powerful force in the galaxy. In the end, the Velinari Empire had become fiction, not destroyed, but transformed into something that could coexist with the endless, wonderful, terrifying uncertainty that made life worth living. And throughout the galaxy, spawn creatures that had once consumed civilizations now told bedtime stories to hybrid children, teaching them that the best adventures always began with the words, "What if we tried something different?" The human race had faced extinction and responded by teaching the galaxy how to dream. It was, Vasquez thought, the most human victory imaginable.